Hello, I'm Anne Flaherty. This interview is part of a series of one-off literary events for the Irish Cultural Centre in Hammersmith. For the past 25 years, the Centre has delivered the most diverse Irish cultural and educational programme outside Ireland. As part of its cultural remit, the Centre provides a platform for Irish writers to launch, promote and discuss their work. And today I'm delighted to welcome Ruairí McKiernan. Ruairí is originally from Cootehill in County Cavan, and in 2013 he went on a journey around Ireland, which resulted in a book called Hitching for Hope. The book has been described as a modern travel tale, part political, part personal quest to capture the power of human resilience. And Ruairí, I wanted to ask you how this book came about, how the trip came about, first of all, because you started off, if I'm right, as a social activist. You'd been very involved in community work. You'd set up a number of companies involved with mental health issues and all sorts of things involving the community. But what happened to bring you to that point in 2013 where you felt that you wanted to undertake this pilgrimage, shall we say?
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Thanks for having me on the chat. I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, I suppose like what propels anybody to action, there tends to be some kind of internal calling, either a deep desire or a frustration or an anger or a point of no return. And for me at that particular juncture, I was experiencing severe burnout. It's something that I'm fairly passionate about talking about because I feel it's so endemic in society, particularly in the Western world, and particularly in the nonprofit and charity sector, where people are typically stretched for resources and there's never enough hours in the day and the need always is so great. So I suppose, and I guess I'd add to that there tends to be sometimes an Achilles heel with passionate folk, that they can be so passionate that they don't slow down and take time for themselves. So that was me those years ago. I'd spent 8 years building up a national youth organization and had put everything into it. And at the end of that juncture, I suppose the tank was empty and I was feeling quite lost, fed up, frustrated, tired, and more than tired, exhausted, and just really needed a change in my life, and felt somewhat hypocritical that I couldn't be an advocate for social change and mental health whilst, not living it. So that's what set me on course to look about how to change my own life, but also it paralleled with the collapse of the Celtic Tiger and starting to ask questions about hope for Ireland also at the same time, and hence the kind of action that came about to go around Ireland on this quest or pilgrimage, as he called it.
Mm-hmm. Well, some people might decide to maybe do a geographic, as it were, and put on a rucksack and go to India to find themselves, or Tibet or something like that. But you decided to stay in Ireland. And why was that?
Yeah, well, I tried the India thing before. Yeah, I've been to an ashram in India and I've gone to Peru and I've ticked all those boxes. And I think travel's always been an important part of my life ever since I was a teenager. I used to go to England during the summers, and then I went around Europe doing interrailing when I was 17, just when I finished the Leaving Cert. And then anyway, I did a lot of traveling over the years. But I think, and people have probably experienced this last summer during COVID times when restrictions eased, the joy of rediscovering your own country can be quite enlightening as well. But also, I suppose in COVID terms, we had no choice but to just maybe stay at home and discover, and even right now, discover our own radius around us as well. And I know that's easier for some than others. So I don't expect that everyone can make that a joyful experience. But yeah, I suppose that the other aspect to it all, Anne, and why Ireland, was that I had a kind of a deep calling to contribute something towards the health of the nation. And I had been trying to express that through the nonprofit work. But I kind of wanted to believe in Ireland. I wanted to believe in the state. I wanted to believe in the future. And at the time, up to 300,000-400,000 people were emigrating post-Celtic Tiger, many of them to London, to the US, to Canada, to Australia, many in their 20s, 30s and 40s. And I would have felt that they had every right to go, and I would never blame anyone for wanting to seek opportunity elsewhere or adventure. But what if we could have this Ireland where people didn't feel they needed to go, and that we had true hope for the future and leadership for the future, that, you know, we could have decent health system, decent healthcare, and truly be a vibrant, creative, prosperous country. And with that, a sense of hope that we weren't going to keep repeating the sins of the past, where whether it be banking crisis or church crisis or whatever any number of crises that we experience, that I felt, you know, where can this hope come from? So I guess the whole trip mirrored this idea that I was looking for hope for myself and for Ireland. And I decided to do that, what I called a listening tour, where I felt at the time there was too much talking and not enough listening, that everybody was an expert on what we should do or what we shouldn't do. And what was really needed was a temperature test to go out and actually listen to people and hear their voices. And it's not to do that in any kind of like save the people kind of way. It's just more on a social experiment. But also when you run out of answers, listening can be a good exercise in humility, to just give up thinking, give up talking, and just start listening.
Okay, so there you were with your thumb out. You started off from Spiddal, where your mother was living, and it had to be Hitching because you didn't have any money. You'd sold your car, so you couldn't drive around Ireland. Clearly, the weather wasn't conducive to walking, and you didn't have a bike, so you decided to hitch. Now, let's talk about hitching for a minute, because nobody hitches anymore, do they?
Not really, no.
No.
um, the odd one, you encounter the odd one, but very, very few. So I suppose the other way that hitching came into the frame was that I realized that I needed a mechanism to encounter people in a very random way, that on an unplanned way. And if I made it too strategic and too formalized, and even like too insular, if I was going by train or by bus or by car, that I would be disconnected somewhat from people. So the idea of hitching just arrived out of nowhere, but it had a kind of resonance for me, in that I grew up hitchhiking like many people in rural Ireland. It was a means to an end, and it wasn't a big deal. You know, it was just a time in Ireland when people didn't always have two cars, sometimes one car. There was a lot of trust, and there was a lot of kind of collective communal spirit. Now, I want to kind of put a disclaimer on that and say that we know obviously that Ireland wasn't this rosy, romantic, safe, trusting place, but there was some ethos around the community collective on that. So hitching was a very normal way of getting around, and the idea of doing it in modern Ireland had a certain appeal to me as a curiosity, and wondering, um, is it even possible? And you know, many people said it wouldn't be, and that then became the voyage.
Mhm. So you started off and you got a lift to, you ended up in Inishbofin, isn't that right? And actually it started off as a great experience. It was almost like going on a holiday, I felt. You know, you were meeting this guy and that guy, and there was, you know, sessions and singing and, you know, walks on the beach and all the rest of it. But then at the back of that, you were starting to meet people who had their own struggles. Isn't that right? And everybody had a story to tell. And that was what was so interesting, was that every single person you met had something to say about their own background. But some of the themes came up again and again, didn't they? Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think you're right to kind of pick up the holiday sensibility. I wasn't setting out on a holiday, but at the end of it, it became kind of a pretty joyous experience in many ways. And a friend's mother was read the book and was joking to him, saying, just saying, sure, that fellow was just gallivanting around on his jollies, you know. And it's, you know, there was a lot of that, but there was a kind of a serious intent as well. And in my defense, I was up till midnight or 1 a.m. every night, kind of writing blogs and things like that. And but yeah, there was when you open up for a meaningful dialogue, and people open up to you, as they did, there were a lot of stories of, you know, the usual. You'll always have chat about the weather, definitely. You'll always have chat maybe about sport, or the general affairs of the nation. But then when it gets a little bit deeper, and I think the deepening happens when you put something on the table in terms of vulnerability and your own story. And for me, just sharing a bit about who I was and what I was up to and why I was doing it, it seemed to engender an element of trust where people would then open up a little bit further beyond the superficial and share some of the struggles and challenges that they were facing. And within that, there was so much raw, painful anger, particularly directed at government. And we have to situate this in the context of the world's most expensive banking bailout that we're still paying for, really. And people feeling betrayed somewhat. And then that having a personal impact in terms of house repossessions, mortgage arrears. And I have family members affected by this myself. Job losses, emigration, children going abroad, all that kind of stuff. So, and then, then we'll always have the human journey of personal health challenge, personal finance challenge, whatever it might be. So there's always the spectrum, whether the economy's bankrupt or the economy's booming. On any given day, people are going to go through a myriad of experiences. So whilst the book is situated in this period, it could also be situated in COVID times or any other time, because I tend to believe, and it's one of the things I've found, is that it's just all part of the human experience of kind of ebbs and flows, suffering, challenge, injustice, but also the core themes then emerging of resilience and strength and spirit of people to overcome and persevere, and through that to find ways within community to stand together and embolden each other. So strength, community spirit, hope, and then a big theme around simplicity emerged, where a lot of people were kind of expressing this sense that they were fed up with the rat race or running around, and life had become too busy and too complex, even in rural Ireland. And I think that's emerged as a current theme in the world right now, is just perhaps some people finding a chance to catch their breath and hope that we don't return to the collective madness of running around.
One of the things that struck me, Ruairí, was that while you had that momentum and you kept moving quite a lot, like you didn't hang around in one place for too long. And then, of course, you kept meeting so many people that at times you were up until maybe 2 a.m. writing your blog, or because then the media got very interested in you. And then you started to come under pressure to have to write articles or be ready for interviews. And there were times when I wondered if you felt that you were now replicating the stress and that you were in danger of burning out again.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So this is the thing. They say wherever you go, you take yourself with you, and you can go to India to find peace, but you're still there. So if you're the source of the imbalance or dysfunction or stress, then India's not going to sort that out. But yeah, I suppose that tendency was there for me, and still is, frankly, the desire or the tendency to overwork and be overly productive. And I struggle to rest a lot, and I've been teaching myself how to sleep more and chill out and taking a proper break at Christmas, all that kind of stuff. So everybody's got their different challenges. For some people, they're sleeping too much, maybe, or I don't know. But yeah, I did identify that myself, that it was becoming a little bit, I don't know, ironic, if you like. And I kind of pulled back then from some of the blogging and everything. So I let that go at some point during the trip. And I was just became a bit more mindful of it, I suppose.
Mm. Did it ever occur to you to maybe wait until you came back and then write the book, or was the book in your mind at all?
Oh yeah,
At the time?
No, there was no book ever. There was
Okay.
no appetite for a book ever in my life, really. I suppose my history with writing books goes back to almost 20 years ago. I was about in my early 20s, and a publisher contacted me out of the blue. They'd heard me on what was actually the Marion Finucane's radio show. I think she was on Liveline, or I think it might even be my first time on radio ever. And I'd been giving out basically about the way kind of corporate globalization was happening and the erosion of workers' rights and environmental protections and so on. And some publisher had heard me, actually his name is Toner Quinn, he now runs the Journal of Irish Music, or Journal of Music. And he asked me would I like to write a book about globalization. And I was living in Canada at the time, and I just said, yeah, I'll give it a lash. So I wrote a third of a book about globalization, and I think it's still on my hard drive somewhere, but I'd say it's terrible. And I ended up giving up. I felt like I didn't have the endurance required to write a book, and I've huge respect for writers or creators of any form that have the discipline and focus. So then after the trip, people just kept encouraging me to write a book, and it felt at some point that the stories that had emerged and that I'd collected didn't belong to me anymore, and that they deserved to be captured and put on a platform and shared. And therefore, like, it became a much bigger project than me, and I became, I suppose, a trustee, and I felt duty bound. And then the whole writing of the book was its own journey, which was just really, really, really challenging and took several years. And I nearly gave up so many times. And in the end, the book actually got rejected by most of the Irish publishers, and I was going to self-publish. And then an American publisher heard one of the podcasts that I do and wanted to find out about my book. And then they decided to publish it internationally. And then it came out the week of the first lockdown in Ireland, and all the bookshops closed. So the book has had a very
Yes.
interesting, twisty journey.
Yes, yes, absolutely. But Rory, when you decided then to put all your experience into this book, which you say you hadn't actually originally planned, did you then have to go and contact a lot of the people that you'd met, because you were now going to be putting their comments into this book? But I mean, you met so many people, everybody from farmers at a mart to Italian tourists to people running bed and breakfasts to people on holidays. How did you even approach that?
Oh, that was, yeah, like the book took thousands and thousands of hours to write and then edit, and then that process alone took a few weeks. So at some point, I just had to give up work and just focus on that. Um, and it became this fascinating and funny and difficult exercise, but also achievable, whereby I had photos of all these various people, and then I had identifiers, and sometimes I had their first name, or I had their full name, or I knew that they knew some other person that lived in the same town. And I just got on the phone and I got on social media and I said, do you know a guy who's owns a butcher shop, and he might be this? And then I'd end up on the phone for like an hour trying to track. And then eventually I get on the phone and said, do you remember a few years ago? And then next thing, I'm on the phone for an hour to this guy, and he's telling me about, and that in itself, you could write a book about that project, because, well, I mean, I smile now, but it was nice in one sense, and so many people had lovely stories, but so many people had actually, somebody had a very horrific car accident, somebody else had lost their husband. You know, there was, in the intervening years, there was other aspects of life had gone on. So and then there was one person wasn't happy at all with the prospect of being in the book, and they didn't, obviously I would never put someone in the book. And then there's some people I could never track down, and I changed names or identifying features and so on. And I suppose I put a hell of a lot of effort in to try to be respectful to people's voices and not to misquote or paraphrase, although the reality is you're never going to be 100%. And so hopefully I haven't left anyone feeling in any way hurt or misrepresented.
Of all the people that you met, some for just maybe half an hour in the car, and others that you might have stayed a night with or spent a day or two with, were there some in particular that touched you in some particular way, or that gave you a message, or that resonated with you, that in a way that hasn't left you?
Oh yeah, so many. Like one of the first people I met before I set off in Spiddle, or on Spidgel in Connemara, was Sunny Jacobs, who sent, excuse me, I think she spent about 17 years in prison, falsely convicted in the United States. She's now, I'm not sure what age Sunny is. She might be 70 now, but she lives in Connemara and runs a centre for people that were wrongfully convicted, mainly in the United States. And Sunny spent several years in isolation. She lost her husband in death row, and she survived, and not only survived but thrived because of her finding yoga and meditation in prison. And I've been thinking of her a lot during lockdowns. Like, there's somebody who found kind of liberation, if you like, in prison. And the same could be said for Nelson Mandela and many others. So when we want to talk about hope, meeting and talking to her at the beginning was interesting, as was just even hanging out with my mother, who she had a car accident as well, and marriage separation and lots of things in her life, and ended up kind of jacking it all in and moving to the West and pursuing a different dream. And she just built this other life in the West, and she's really happy, and she's an inspiration to me and to many, many others. So anyway, on the trip, I'm thinking of Brendan on Inishbofin, who just made me porridge one morning when it was freezing and shivering cold. And
yes,
I'm thinking of Marie Coyne on Inishbofin also, who just shared stories of growing up on the island with no electricity, and
yes,
just those simpler times. And then the farmers in Connemara, who really were going through a very, very hard time, and a lot of talk about suicides in the community, and
yes.
just people persevering there. But I'm trying to think.
Rural men, Ruairí, that was, sorry to interrupt you, but that was one of the things when you went into, I can't remember what village it was in County Galway, and you met a man there, and he said, well, I'm just here with my brother, we're just selling off the last of the cattle. And there was this kind of quiet desperation, I thought, in a lot of those rural men.
That was in Mam Cross in the Mart. And even now I'm thinking of the Mart's been closed. There's this horrendous rural isolation all over, really. And first of all, there's a challenge within, I suppose, what we might call like dominant masculinity, or the culture around men or manhood, often, not always, whereby we often don't have the ability or the culture or the platform or the opportunity to share and express hurt, feelings, emotion. And sometimes that can take negative forms of expression, but then often it gets bottled up. And just to see and hear these men that were really a lot of anger, but just this one man on antidepressants, and a fear that he would have to emigrate, or his children would have to emigrate, and that he'd become separated. He was already separated from his partner. And, just the gentleness and softness and pain that he spoke with really touched me. And I'm minded also to talk about Jane Johnston down in Wexford, who has 2 autistic children, and just the fight that she had and still has for her children, and the love and care and courage that she shows to ensure they get the right treatment, support and services, which isn't always the case. And that's so true for many families with people with children with special needs or with disabilities, where it's a constant fight, and it shouldn't be, it doesn't need to be. And so those people really, like, they're the ones that I see are the heroes and champions that keep the love going and keep the community and the country together when too often the state fails them. And I just feel so strongly that it doesn't need to be like that we can have a stronger, healthier, more compassionate state. So I believe that whole dynamic between personal change and social change is so important.
So just coming up to date now with where you're at, that was 2013. Here we are now in 2021, and in the middle of yet another lockdown. And again, I suppose people are looking for hope, aren't they? What's your read of how the country is at the moment?
Yeah, it's I suppose Ireland isn't hugely different to many other countries in that it's a massive period of flux and a lot of anxiety, I think, and a lot of anxiety is born out of fear of the future and not knowing what's going to happen. I suppose I met 2 or 3 historians on that trip, and they were very keen to situate any kind of turbulence and upheaval in a historical context. And you do hear this said a lot, that this will pass. And it will pass. And in a year from now, we'll be coming out the other end, or before then even. And, it's like turbulence is part of life, and then it becomes part of a country's life. And you think of any country, think of England and the world wars, think of Ireland and the North and the Troubles, think of the famine, think of so many periods in every country's history where it goes through upheaval, turbulence, pain, suffering, strife. And in many ways, like my wife is a meditation teacher, and she often talks about the Vedic tradition, whereby they quite often reference the idea that the universe is in this dance between destruction and creation, and that sometimes destruction is a necessary part of, well, it is a necessary part. It's not something that any of us wants, but I'd like to think that out of the destruction can come the creation, and there's an opportunity here for us if we want to seize it, in that the creation can be a positive, life affirming creation, and that we can take some goodness from this. We can take the desire for the world we want from this moment. And it doesn't, this future is essentially unwritten, to quote a great Englishman, Joe Strummer from The Clash. The future is unwritten. So it's up to us to write that story in our own lives, but then collectively as nations as well. So I am hopeful. I do have my days. It depends how much media I consume on any given day, because some days you're just like, make it stop. But all you need to do is turn off the radio or turn off the internet, and suddenly the world can be a beautiful place, and you see birds outside, or you go for a walk and just enjoy nature. And so for me, keeping perspective on life and the world is so important right now, and to just mind yourself. It's so cliche to say, but mind yourself is the most important work that we all have to do right now, and then mind each other.
And then is that a message that you're trying to get out now? You talked about, I mean, all we can do really is live in our community. We're all behind locked doors at the moment, but we can, I suppose, on a very micro level, engage with our street or our parish or whatever. Is that actually happening in Ireland at the moment, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably it's like anything. It's not black and white. Some people are retreating into themselves or their family bubbles and so on, and that's necessary and understandable. And sometimes people don't have anything to give other people, that they're just so focused on keeping themselves together. It's completely understandable. But there absolutely has been kind of a renaissance of community care and compassion, and so many initiatives for people to kind of highlight each other's needs and plights, and then just like whether it be WhatsApp groups or online groups or initiatives to kind of shine a light on those that are less fortunate. And I'm thinking of all the different charities that have had their fundraising initiatives cut short, and there are always people that are seeking to kind of identify that need and highlight that need. But I suppose it's never enough, and that's the challenge. And that's probably one of the messages that I try to impart, is that if we have energy and resources and privileges at our disposal, then let's try and do more. And sometimes the temptation is to go and binge on another Netflix series and all that kind of stuff, and I do a bit of that myself. So you have to indulge. There's no problem with that, I don't think. But a lot of the biggest joys that I've got in the last several months have been really just trying to do things in connection with other people. And I suppose the book has become a gift that keeps giving, in that when the bookshops originally closed, I set up an online event, kind of launched with guest speakers, Lynn Rowan and Francis Black and Colin McAnummer providing music. And then since then, I've done about 20 of them, and I'm basically zooming all around the world. And at this point, it's not about the book or selling the book. They've become these kind of community gathering events where we get to kind of just talk a little bit about where we're at in the world and some of the challenges. And it's just given me so much connection with the world. Like every week I'm in a different country, and sometimes I'm up at midnight with different time zones. And I think there's always something you can do, and like just recently I've taken to recording little funny video messages for some people I know, and just sending them a video message out of the blue, so that when they click on their phone and they load it up, they might get a giggle. It can take 30 seconds to do it. There's just always a way. Like there's nothing to stop us writing letters and things like that. But Yeah, it's a hard time. There's no doubt, and I think there's going to be a big mental health impact
Mm-hmm.
from this that needs more attention for sure.
Mm. Well, that's true, and they talk about that over here as well. And I'm sure that's something that you're getting back as feedback from when you do these events, as you say, from which are broadcast to different countries. Pretty much as a human race, I guess we're all experiencing the same things. And so I was just wondering there that while we can all try and keep our spirits up, as you say, keep our mental health up and all the rest of it, in terms of practicalities, I just wonder how you think that the state, the government will what will be needed from them, as opposed to 2013, when there's a very different economic situation, and this is going to be, I suppose, uncharted waters, isn't it, post pandemic and post lockdown?
Yeah, it is on one level, and then on the other level, like, you know, the post Celtic Tiger rebuilding, if you like, that perhaps we've learned some things around that, and hopefully one of the things we learned is that austerity isn't one of the ways to like rebuild an economy or society. That like we essentially need some kind of Marshall Plan where we can have, you know, huge state investment. And one of the things two of the core things we really need are massive ramping up and investment to housing. There's an immediate and drastic housing shortage, and then the health system continues to be on its knees. And we didn't need the pandemic to teach us that, but it certainly highlighted that in alarming terms. So there can be a moment of national development here, and kind of rallying behind a new vision and a collective vision, and to really get that Ireland that we've been grasping at, and maybe just has been out of sight for us. But you know, sometimes it takes a crisis to spur anyone into action. So I think the possibility is there. Whether the choices are made and we revert back into the same old, that remains to be seen, and that's a choice that everyone's going to have to make. I think the same promises and platitudes will emerge, and you know, there's been many promises that I've seen over 20 years around mental health services that haven't materialized or been developed. So a lot of these problems were here pre-crisis, and what we need to be careful is that governments don't use the cloak of the crisis for an excuse to say why they can't act. Like we've seen with, whether it be with vaccines or with health and safety, public health measures, what's possible when people put their minds to it. So if we want to eradicate homelessness, for instance, that's entirely possible. Finland decided to do it. Why can't Ireland do it? So, you know, there's always going to be challenges in society, but I think just there's a real great need for bolder visionary leadership, and that is really up to the Irish people as well to demand that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I was just wondering that if you were to revisit some of those places, say in a couple of years, so that it's the 10-year anniversary of your first trip, I wonder if you ever thought about doing that, doing another pilgrimage around Ireland, another
Yeah.
Hitching for Hope, or would you feel that the moment is gone? You know, I mean, it's very much social history in a way, isn't it?
Yeah. I started to realize that as I was writing it, that it was a social history. And I think in any moment, it's important to document the period. Sometimes it's documented in an academic sense or sociological sense, and they're really important as well. And like I would stress that my book doesn't have academic rigor attached to it, if you like. So it's a folk kind of telling. But I think this moment needs a social history as well. So one of the kind of interesting things that happened for me a couple of months ago during a previous lockdown was I started writing every day over a 6-week lockdown, and what emerged was this kind of pandemic diary, and then I decided I'd finish it on the last day of the lockdown. And so I ended up writing 70,000 words, and it's effectively a book that is kind of a social history of a Cavan man in County Clare wandering around his 5 kilometer radius and seeing who he bumps into, and going for swims in the sea, and watching Trump on TV, and reflecting and wondering. And I'm not sure what will happen that piece of writing, if it becomes a book or not. I'm not sure. as you probably know, like it takes a lot of investment and resources and time to put a book together. So we'll see. It's still, it's still early days. But I think it's a tremendous moment in history, and we will look back on it and go, what was that about? But there are choices in it, and I think I have to be honest and say about 50% of people I talk to are finding positives in it as well. And that should not take away from the negatives at all in any way, but let's kind of zone in on what those positives are and see what they're telling us. And one of the things is the simplicity theme and the desire for families to have more time together and not be stuck in commutes and rat races and all that kind of stuff. And that life doesn't need to be such a strain, that it can be a joyful experience for people.
No, that's true. I think if I was to find any parallel with your book and the situation now, it would be that that quest for that desire for simplicity, as is stripping it back, people baking the bread or starting to garden or knit or whatever, that in some ways when it really becomes only about survival, it strips everything right back, doesn't it? People aren't shopping. Well, they might be shopping online, I suppose, but they're not spending in that kind of impulsive way anymore. And a lot of people have lost their jobs, and a lot of people are saying, what is my purpose, or what will be my purpose, or what's it all about? What is it all about at the end of the day? It's about family and friends and staying healthy, and then maybe that leads you on to think about other things like your environment, and that maybe leads you to think about climate change or that sort of thing, so yes, simplicity, I suppose, would be what I would observe from people. Although it's hard to know human beings what they are. We may just revert to our old ways very quickly. Who knows?
Yeah. And there's a real danger as well that in the vacuum of answers that there are other clear and loud voices in the world, as it's been well documented at this point, but they're very kind of voices of division and hate and blame. And I see that. I saw it yesterday on my Facebook feed that there's a really, really dangerous road that has been carved out intentionally and strategically by some forces to keep us apart, and to, particularly from a racial, religious, ethnicity point of view. And so I think we need to hold our nerve as well, and to not kind of fall victim to that. Like it's happened in the UK, it's happened in the US, it's happened in Hungary, Poland, Brazil, and elsewhere. And it is happening in Ireland. There's a kind of a radicalization, particularly, it's not just young people. It's actually, I've seen older women, I've seen a whole variety of people kind of go into this, and some of it's related to this whole QAnon conspiracy stuff. But for me, it's not a narrative or a road of love and kindness or justice or equality. It's a love of it's a road of fascism, quite frankly. And like, the word gets thrown around a bit, but history is full of examples right up to modern day Europe, in Portugal and Greece and elsewhere. So I think just holding our nerve is really important right now. And like, when you say what's it all about, that is a big, important question that I think is worth reflecting on. And for me, it's about love and kindness and love and justice. And if you can try and keep that kind of emphasis on love at the core, then I think that can steer us in the right direction. But if we fall victim to fear, then we're in a more dangerous road. So holding the nerve is important, and staying kind of tight together and having important, hard conversations with each other and challenging each other where necessary as well, which isn't always easy.
I suppose that has to come from leadership as well, whether it's at national level or local level. And I wondered if you were interested yourself in ever going into politics, or going into a role where you would be spreading that sort of message in a kind of practical way.
Yeah. Well, I suppose one of the things I forgot to mention was that during this time, President Higgins had appointed me to the Council of State. So I'd spent
That's a
7
big
years.
deal, Ruairí, isn't it? That's a very big deal.
Yeah, it is. It's a pretty big deal. So it's essentially a constitutional advisory body. There's roughly 20 members, mostly the Taoiseach Taoiseach, ex-presidents, ex-Taoiseach. So Mary Robinson, Mary McAleese, they're all on it, and then the president gets to appoint 7 people. It meets very infrequently. It's an unpaid kind of quasi-honorary role, but has some function. So it's a big honor, but I suppose at the time I knew that it was a platform as well, and that I felt that perhaps it helped me open up other channels for giving other people a voice. And, that was happening during this trip. So the book, Hitching for Hope, actually ends at the Áras, and there was a Council of State meeting
Yes.
called at the end of the book. So do I want to get into politics? Look, for me, it's really about being of service, and wherever you can be of service, then be of service. And if it's in your local community and you're serving within your 5-kilometer radius, then do that. And I don't know what the future holds. I've never been drawn to any one particular political party, and I can't really imagine myself putting my big ugly face on a lamppost and knocking doors asking people to vote for me. I don't know, and I know many great people are in Parliament. I have friends that are senators and so on. I don't know. I need to kind of think about what my next moves are and how I can best play a role. But I've no burning desire to be a politician.
You'd rather work at
sure.
the community level. So at the moment you're promoting your book. You have these you've got a series of podcasts where you talk to well-known people like Christy Moore, and you have also a more local community podcast series as well, haven't you, of interesting and important people from County Clare.
Yeah.
And you're out there walking the beach, I'm sure, in Lahinch, and getting the fresh air. So, and you've got the 70,000 words, which might potentially become your next book. Do you feel yourself that you're still at that crossroads because of the lockdown, still trying to figure out where to go forward?
A little bit, but one of the things that the trip also taught me, and the lockdown continues to teach me, and life continues to teach me, is to just kind of really focus on the present. And I think it's one thing that the Buddhists got right in terms of their philosophy or religion, is that just be in this moment and not to get too stuck in the past or the future. You don't want to deny the past nor the future either, but it's a major challenge and it takes some skill. And for me, just some practice around meditation or some other practice. Some people do it through music or exercise, but to just try and find some stillness, some solitude, and to just enjoy every day. And if you stay focused and intentional and mindful in the day, then the future kind of takes care of itself, But that's not to say that we shouldn't have hopes, dreams, and visions for the future as well. So I'm at a moment where I do need to make some kind of new goals or plans, but I also don't want to rush them either, and they need to come from the right place. And the danger is that you can just make up something to do. There's always something to do. And I think traditionally for me, February and Bridget's Day and the traditional Irish coming of spring and Imbolg was always a good time for New Year's resolutions rather than January 1st and that kind of thing. So yeah, like they say that in the Irish language, Imbolg comes from, or Bridget's Day season, that period of the season comes from Imbolg, and which comes from the word for pregnancy, and it's the idea of being pregnant with possibilities. So I think springtime is a good time for those kind of, they say winter's a time for the kind of dreaming and let things just kind of dream and unfold, and then springtime we get to bounce out into the world. So hopefully we'll all be bouncing out into the world before long and getting to travel again and meet up and have some fun, have some parties, and the Irish Centre there will be back in full swing with concerts and so on.
Absolutely. And we hope to see you here one day, Ruairí.
I'd love it.
And thank you very much for joining us today. I think that's a good note to end the conversation on. And just to say, of course, that Hitching for Hope, it's published by Chelsea Green, am I right, publishers? It's available in all good bookshops and online. And also, of course, your website, if you want to give a shout out to that.
Yeah, it's www.hitchingforhope.com. That's the book, hitchingforhope.com. And yeah, the book is, it's available as an ebook and an audiobook and paperback, obviously. And I'm still doing more online events. I've just planned one for San Francisco, and I'm doing one in Sydney, Australia, and then I'll be doing more in the UK as well. And Culture Ireland have been supporting the publicity end of things as well. So yeah, it seems to be taking its own life form, this world tour. And so you never know what comes out of these things. You know, here I am zooming around the world. I never expected to be doing that. And it's been an amazing revelation. And here I am talking to you, and that's been really enjoyable. I've enjoyed that as well. So thank you, Anne.
Not at all. It's a timely message, and both at home and abroad. And thank you very much, Ruairí, and the best of luck.
Thanks again.